want you to understand what dialysis is and a little bit about how it works. So dialysis is a treatment. They like to say it replaces what your kidney does. It is a good substitution for what your kidney does. It can keep you from dying from the majority of kidney functions that are failing, but it doesn't completely replace the kidney, all right? Nothing is like the original, but it does a great job. It does a good job of removing waste and metabolites that our body naturally produce, and it removes extra fluid. It can balance electrolyte and keep your body in a chemical balance. It replaces the critical functions of the kidney. And there are two main types of dialysis. There's one called hemodialysis, and this is the one that most people are familiar with. And this is where we get access to the blood. It's sent through a machine and a filter. That filter balances out your electrolytes, takes a lot of the waste off, and it removes a lot of the fluid. The access is usually gained through a catheter, which I tell people it's kind of like a big IV, and it goes in either the neck or the groin area, or is done through what they call a fistula or graft. And the fistula is like a special, I call it a super vein. They can do a surgery to create what is basically a super vein. It'll be a large vein, usually in the arms. You can't form in the leg, but usually it's in the arms. And you can access blood and send it through the machine through this thing called a fistula. And then there's also something called a graft, which is an artificial super vein, if you want to call it, that you can use to also do the same thing as you can do with a fistula. As much as possible, you try to avoid getting the catheter because they are sources of infection. There's certain things you can't do when you have a catheter, like take a shower. So if you have a fistula graft, you can take the shower. If you have a catheter, you really can't, or you have to really tape it off and make sure that it doesn't get wet. Hemodialysis is typically done about 3 days a week in a dialysis center. Each session is typically anywhere from 3 to 4 hours long. They do have the option for what we call home hemodialysis. So when you go into a center, there's like this huge machine there with technology. They actually have a much smaller machine that you can actually take home and do the same or very similar treatments at home. It usually adds a little more flexibility, and for a lot of people, better quality of life because you're at home as opposed to going to a center. The second one is what we call peritoneal dialysis. This is interesting because most people don't know this, but in your abdomen, there's actually a lining. It's almost like a little pocket that's in there. And because your intestines are actually covered by a little special membrane. And there's also one that covers kind of your musculature that's in your abdomen. And there's a space in there. What can be done is that you could put a catheter in that space, infuse fluid into that space, leave it there for a little while. And what'll happen is that the same thing that goes on with the filter with the hemodialysis will happen in that space with that fluid there. You can actually take extra fluid off of a person. You can actually balance some of the electrolytes off of a person through this little pocket that's in the belly. So now peritoneal dialysis is something that's done at home, because what happens is that traditionally you'll put fluid in there, you let it, we call it dwell for a little while, and then you'll drain it out, put some more fluid in there, and then you kind of do the same thing. You do that for another couple of hours. So that's the way it traditionally was done. Now, they do have something called a cycler. And what this cycler does is that you actually attach yourself to the machine, set it up for hours. Most people do it at nighttime, and the machine will do this. So while you're sleeping, it will put the fluid in, you let it dwell for a period of time, drain it back out, and then infuse it back again. So yes, so you're just doing this while you're sleeping. And those people don't have to go into the center unless there's a complication. You usually check in with your nephrologist about once a month, and you do a lot of this stuff at home. Now, PD really allows you a lot of flexibility, a lot of independence. You can travel with PD. So if you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to Florida for the next 3 months. And what you do is you can arrange to have your materials sent down to, to say Miami, and, you'll just do the same thing you were doing at home at, wherever you're staying in Miami, whether, like Airbnb, hotels, whatever. Now, one thing you do have to do is you have to make sure the area is clean, but you can do that with that. You can do it if you had a camper. You would just have to make sure you got access to your supplies, and you can do that. So that does allow a person to get a lot of flexibility, a lot of independence, and a lot of times, and some people think it's a lot gentler on the body as well. Okay, these are the two main types of dialysis. Something that people really, need to know about before you need this, so that you know that you have options. Because really the default option is for people to go into the center. But educating people about these other options, you can decide what fits your life better.